Hello everyone and welcome back to AVR120 Session 5. This will be regarding C# arrays and methods. So we'll start off with arrays. Arrays are essentially a variable that hold multiple values. Each section is called an element and each element starts at 0. So if you have an array that you've set to have 4 slots, it will actually start at 0. So it would have start at the 0 element, 0, 1, 2, 3 um, elements there. So this is an example of an array. You can see here that we have to declare the data type of the array. So in this scenario, we're going to have an array of integers, okay? All right, and we're going to have, that's the data type. So that's what an array of integers looks like. If you had string in front of that, that would be the same thing. So like a string with the brackets would be an array of strings. And then this is the array name. And you would set this equal to you would use the new keyword, okay? And then this is declaring that you're having an array of 5 elements here. So it's just declaring that you have you're creating a new integer array, and that array will have 5 elements in it. And remember that it starts at 0. So actually, if you want to set something, say, to the 4th element of the array, you would need this would actually you would actually need to um, set it to the 3rd element of the array. And to set an integer into a specific slot of an array or just data in general, this would be the syntax down here. Okay, so what this is essentially saying is we're setting the 4th element of this array we've created, array of 5 elements, to 7. You may ask, why is it the 4th element and it says 3 here? Because because remember how I said an array starts at 0? So this is actually the 4th element because 0 is the first element. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3. Um, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So that would be make it the 4th element of the array. And so this line essentially is saying take the 4th element of the array and set it to 7. Now we can actually do this is so this is essentially declaring the array, right? And this is setting value, initializing some of the elements to a value. But we can actually declare and initialize an array at the same time. And so I've done this for an array of 5 strings, but you can do this for an array of 5 integers or floats or whatever data type that you choose, okay? So if we're going to the code here, all right, I can, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. We can go ahead and make an array up here. So I'll put it underneath. So in the code here, I'm just going to reformat this a little bit and zoom in. We're going to create an array of strings, okay? And I'm going to call it inventory. And I'm going to initialize the array. So I've declared the array string inventory. The data type is string. The name is inventory. And I'm going to set it to 5 different strings. So we have, I'm going to say bow, shields, sword, maybe like shirt, and cloak. Okay. Um, so we now have an array of 5 strings, and so this would actually be an array, a 5-element of array, right? But this is the 0 element, okay? And so it would only go up to, if you wanted to access this here, okay, I would have to access the 4th element of the array, okay? So I'll demonstrate this by, I'm going to write the I'm going to access, okay, the 0 element of the array here. I'm going to write that to screen, okay? And then I'm going to write the 4th element to the screen there, okay? And so you'll see that it's going to print off bow and then cloak. So if we go ahead and save and run, we'll see that it printed off bow and cloak, okay? So if we exit out of here, now if I change this to 5, okay, and I save it and I run it now, you're going to see we're going to get an error. Immediately get an error, and this is the error. Index was outside the bounds of the array. So that means that this element of the array does not exist, all right? Kind of proving the point essentially that an array of 5 elements actually you would only put you could only go up to 4 here. So the 0 because it takes 0 into account in an array. So the 0 element is the first element, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And what it's saying here is that there is no 5, right? Because it would have to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there would need to be another string. And since there's nothing, it throws an error. So in addition to arrays, we're going to go over lists. So lists are again a variable type that holds. They're actually technically a data collection, but they function like a variable that holds multiple elements similar to an array. They must indicate a data type. So again, that could be string, integer, float, etc. The lists have elements like an array, but can easily you can easily add and remove entries to the list. And there are additional methods a list has access to for sorting or checking the list, but we're just going to be focusing on adding and removing entries. I encourage you to go ahead and search the documentation online, Microsoft's documentation for lists, to see what are some of the options there. You can do things like check and sort lists. Those are kind of built-in features of this data type. But for the time being, we're just going to focus on adding and removing entries. And an array has a set fixed number of elements once you've initialized and declared and initialized the array. Whereas a list is a little bit more mutable. You can add and remove entries fairly easily. Um, so a list, you can just keep adding to the list. Whereas with an array, if there's 5 elements in the array, you're not adding another element once you've initialized the array, more or less. So an example of a list, this is an example of a list here. It's a list of strings, all right? So use the list keyword, the string data type, and the variable name will be armor. The list name will be armor. We use the assignment operator again, the new keyword here, and then it will be a list again of the list keyword and string. And then you'll also need these parentheses at the end. Don't forget these. This is important. After the string and then a quotation mark. In order to add an entry to a list, it's very easy. You actually use this .add method. So it's armor.add, and then you can put whatever data type you need inside of the parentheses. So in this case, I'm going to add a bronze helmet. And then you can remove an entry in the list by using the armor.remove method, and again, same uh, syntax as the add. And then keep in mind when you're doing that, you need capital letters because they are methods. And we'll go over methods in a second here. So lists, can be declared and initialized in the same way that an array can. So if you're looking at the list here, it's a list of strings called armor, and you're using the new keyword, again, the list keyword, the string data type, and then the exact kind of very similar to an array, just the curly brackets, and then the strings there, and a quotation mark at the end. And yeah, this is a list of 5 strings. So we already talked a little bit about loops. One of the loops we did not mention was a for each loop. And a for each loop is one of the easiest ways I've found to loop through an array or a list. Now, each loop kind of has its own separate, unique function, as we kind of talked about. However, the for each loop is very useful in the sense that it's easy to read and it's pretty easy to write. And you can use kind of a variable to kind of loop through it there, but at the same time, the limitation of the for each loop is that you can't really control where you are in the loop. You can't like break out of the loop, for example, after a certain amount of times it's run through. And you also can't really easily keep track of where you are in the loop. It kind of just runs through the loop. So for just quickly running through an array and printing it to screen, which is what we're essentially going to do in the code, the for each loop is pretty nice for that. So the structure of a for each loop is you have the for each keyword, okay, and then you're going to have inside of the parentheses here a string data type, since we're going to be looping through an array of strings, okay? And then it's the in keyword, and then the name of the array we are looping through, and then whatever code you'd like inside of these squiggly brackets here. In this case, I'm going to be writing the what is in each element of the array here. Print the string of the current element. So just to back up a little bit too, this string item, okay, is the variable that you essentially use as the kind of placeholder when you're looping through your inventory array there. So for each essentially item in inventory, okay, so for each string variable item in the inventory string array, I want you to print the item to screen, and that will print each element inside of the inventory array. So if we go back to the code, we're going to go ahead and use a for each loop. And you can also use this with lists too, and we can kind of show that as well here when we start working on the methods. So the for each loop, you use the for each, and I'm going to go ahead and use the string item, okay? So that's the placeholder variable essentially that we're going to be using to loop through the array in the array of strings inventory. I want to print print item. So essentially what that is going to be doing here is this item represents each element in the inventory array. Okay, so each time this code runs, it's going to print first the bow, then shield, then sword, then shirt, then cloak. Okay, and it loops through each time, so it's going to do it on a separate line. Okay, so it'll write the first item, loop again, write the second item, loop again, write the third item, loop again. So if we go ahead and save and run this, sorry, you'll see a loop through and go went bow, shield, sorry, bow, shield, sword, shirt, cloak, right? So it printed those off in there. So for each loop is a good way to loop through an array. So the next section we're going to be kind of talking about is methods. So a method is a code block that runs when called. Um, so methods are signatures that have signatures that consist of return type, name of the method, and the parameter list. And you can pass different types of data directly or in the form of variables to a method, and methods can return data. And methods are self-contained. They can only communicate with each other by receiving variables or passing out variables. So you may have noticed that all the code is inside of this static void main thing here, right? So what is this? This is the main method. This is the main method of the program, and the main method of a program is essentially where the main um, functionality of the program is, or the main kind of roadmap of the program is. Okay, and essentially what a method is it's a self-contained block of code. So the main method is the main method. Every program has a main method. That main method has the main functionality of the code right in it. You know, all the way down here. Um, but you can also essentially have other blocks of code that get called. So other blocks that get run from this main section here. So you can have it can, um, with code in general, it runs through each line sequentially. So it's going to declare this string. It's going to declare this integer and initialize it to 60. It's going to declare this float player gold and initialize to 5.5 and so on and so forth, but a method essentially is another section of code that will be called from this main method, okay? And it will run essentially, it will jump down and run that code and then return to this main section of code and then continue onward. So again, the syntax for a method is its access specifier. So this is going to be more important when we start getting more into classes, but essentially this is what allows other parts of your program to access this method. And again, this method is a self-contained piece of code. A return type is, as I mentioned prior, the method can return data. So here is where you indicate what kind of data can be returned by the method. Um, you'll see in the code, if we go back here, you see void. Void just means that it doesn't return any data. Okay. Static just means that um, all the code essentially has to be in this file, and you can't make copies of this code essentially. Um, like you couldn't have another main method and call that method; it wouldn't work. Okay, so then the method name. Okay, so that's the name of the method, obviously, and it needs to be in Pascal case. So Pascal case again is capital. Both letters of the name or both letters of the words must be in capital. So if um, if we're going back to this code like main, you can see the first letter is capital. If I had another method and I called it um, another main, um, it would be a capital A, and then main would also be capitalized. So the parameter list is essentially how you can pass data back and forth between methods. You use this parameter list to store data in these variables, these parameters essentially that you can use to pass data back and forth. But we're going to go into that a little bit deeper later. But for now, just know that you need to have these parentheses. Even if you have nothing in this parameter list, here, sorry, nothing in this parameter list, you need to have these parentheses. And then you need to have the curly braces, I should say. So you need to have that after every method, regardless. Um, and then you can have your code in between these curly braces. No quotation marks. Uh, you'll see no quotation marks because it's not a line of code. This is its own self-contained section of code. So, don't make the mistake of putting like a quotation mark at the end of this method because it'll break the program. Okay, so one, calling is we can create a simple method called adventure greeting, and the definition of this method you can see here is static void, and I think this needs to be a lowercase. I think it might have capitalized it. But so it's a static. It doesn't return anything, and the name of the method is called adventure greeting, and it has no parameters, but you still need those parentheses as you can see, and we can put the code in here. Okay, so again, uh, this will just print some text to screen. Okay, we can have a simple. This method in particular is a simple method that just prints some text to screen. So this method is called from main. Um, this write some text method, and this is the syntax for a method call. Okay, so first you would write the method. You'd have a you'd write the method write some text, and you could have static void write some text. Okay, this would be the method name. This return type is void, right? So no data is returned from main. And then in between these curly braces, maybe we have some text that prints the screen. So this method is at the bottom of the program. It's after, if you see these dotted lines here, so the curly brace, this is the opening curly brace for the main method, and then this dotted line if you follow it all the way down to the bottom of the program, it'll show you where the ending curly brace for the main method is. And if you're going to write a method in the same code file here, you need to make sure that it's after the closing curly brace. So if we go back to the code here, I need to follow this dotted line. So this is the opening curly brace all the way down. Okay, and if I mouse over it, it will tell me. You can see there that it says static void main. It tells me basically the closing curly brace this is attached to there. So we're going to scroll back up, and we have a kind of adventure greeting here already. So this section here, what is your name? Um, and then would you like to begin your adventure? And this section here, right? So I'm going to take all this code and I'm going to put it in a method. So we'll go ahead and do that now by first writing the method signature. So if I scroll down here, all right, again, remember mouse over it. Okay, so that's the end of main there. So I'm just going to fix the formatting just a tad. Okay, and then what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to write a method. So I'll create a static method. That means it can't be instantiated. So we're going to get into that more with classes, but just don't worry too much about that. Most of our methods for now are going to be static. Void is data type, or the data type it returns. It's not returning any data at the moment since we're doing a simple method, so it's void. And then we're going to go ahead and write the name. So again, Pascal case, so capital A, and I'm going to call this adventurer greeting. Um, my method doesn't have any parameters in between the parentheses because we're just printing to screen for the moment. And okay, so I've created my first method. All right, and if you mouse over, remember main. This is the end of the. This is the closing bracket for main. So just make sure that when you're writing the method, you're putting it under the closing curly brace for the main method. And if we scroll all the way up here, we'll go ahead and we will see the code. So the code we've already written. Hello, adventure. What is your name? And then we kind of ask them to say yes if they want to go on their adventure. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to Control X this. And I am going to scroll down and I'm going to just paste this, Control V, okay, into this adventurer greeting. And so we're getting some errors here because we've set the adventurer name equal to console, okay, dot readline. And also up here we print out the name here. And actually, this is a mistake on my part. I need to take these 3 lines of code here and scroll down, and I'm also going to paste these at the bottom of this, like so. All right, so we're getting all these errors, right? We're getting 6 errors. And if you mouse over it, it says the name adventurer name does not exist in the current context, right? So what does that mean? Well, remember how I said a method is a self-contained block of code? So the method has its own variables, just like the main method has variables, and can access its variables. But since we're not passing variables back and forth, you can't. It can't access this adventurer name, which we declared up here. Okay, string adventurer name, right? So what we need to go ahead and do, all right, is we can go ahead and just Control X this. And we're going to get a bunch more errors because a lot of our other code here is referencing the adventurer name. Okay. Um, so we're going to scroll down here. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste that line of code, and we'll see that we no longer have errors here, but we have like 13 errors in the main part of the code here. Okay, in main method. If you double click but we're still getting errors here. You'll see that we have the player health error as well as 13 additional errors in the main method. If we double click the error in the error list, the first one, it'll take you to that first error. And again, if you're not seeing the error list, you need to go to View at the top and then go to the error list option there. Okay? So we have all these errors here. So that's because each method doesn't have access to each other's methods variables unless we basically give them access to those variables. Um, it's called passing variables to a method and passing variables from a method. Um, so in order to access that data that's stored in that variable, we need to essentially pass the adventurer name back from the adventurer greeting method. But we're not going to go ahead and do that yet. Uh, we'll be going over that in the next session. So for now, to fix this, we're going to just go ahead and create um, a string variable adventurer name and set it equal to Joe. And then we'll see that we have one more error. Um, and this is referencing the player health, which is defined in the main method again. So again, remember, the adventure greeting is its own method, and the main method has access to its own separate variables aside from adventure greeting. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take this line, these lines here, or just this line, excuse me. Scroll back up, and I'm going to paste this here. Actually, I need to paste it after the variable I just declared. And I know this is a little messy. We'll fix it up a little bit with putting things in the methods here. Okay, so we'll paste the line of code there after the adventurer name. And then I'm going to call the method here. So in order to do a method call, so I want to call the adventure greeting method we just created, you would do this. You would essentially just type adventure greeting, and you'll see it pops up there. You could actually just press enter and tell a type kind of sense that's what you were trying to write. So then it goes ahead and completes that for you, and then you just put the parentheses at the end of it, okay? And then you go to the end and you put a quotation, or a semicolon, excuse me. So this is how you call the method we just created. All right. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and actually comment out this string of inventory strings, this inventory array, and then the for each loop. And we're going to go ahead and put that in a method as well. In the next video. So if we go ahead and we save this, we start it, we'll see, okay, it's asking what the adventurer's name is. So if we scroll down to where the adventure greeting method was that we created, okay, it's going through the text there, and I'll say Rich, and it says, would you like to begin your adventure? And I will say yes, and my adventure begins now. And then it says my name. All right. And then if we continue on with the program, so let's scroll back up here at the top, okay? So we can see that the program goes through it declares this variable, declares this variable. This is commented out, so it's not running it this time. And then it runs this adventurer greeting method here, okay? And that is where all of this is stored, okay? But remember, in order to fix that error we were having, I had to set the adventurer name because we're using it again in this method. I actually had to create this own separate variable, adventure name variable for the main method. And then I had to move that line out of that kind of greeting and put it here. because the player health is only available in the main method at the moment. Okay? So now if we continue on with the program, I just wanted to show you, what do you guys think adventurer name is going to be? So we'll go ahead and we'll keep running it. And as you can see, it's Joe now. And that's because I set the adventurer name to Joe. Because I had to create that variable to fix all these errors we were having, right? So essentially, we kind of see now that this adventurer greeting method, right, is its own self-contained section of code, and that the adventurer name variable inside of this adventurer greeting method, right, is its own string variable that's only within the scope of this method, okay? Only accessible via the code inside of this method, all right? And when it runs all this code, okay, it'll print it to screen like we wanted it to, but it won't record the data to this main method here. And so essentially, if we're going through in sequence, it goes through this, it goes to this method, it jumps down, it runs all the code down there, okay, and then I set another string variable after this method runs called adventure. Set the adventure name to Joe. All right, and then we scroll down here. Okay, and it prints off that adventurer name. And it's not the same, and it's not the adventurer name that the user entered, right? The user enters their adventurer name in the adventurer greeting method. Um, I had to set adventurer name in this main method. So the user cannot determine their own name here. And so that's kind of the issue we're running into now, which is, we want the adventurer, we want the user to be able to input their own name. So in order to solve that issue, we essentially need to pass out this string variable, this string variable from this method. And so we will go over that in the next video. Thanks, guys.